Integration and assimilation are both contingent on you being able to understand the other individual. That doesn't happen when you only see this individual 20 years after you're born. With that, we are proud to defend multiculturalism.
Prime Minister, invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
I go to Malay college called Kamsa. It's a Malay school, but we have Indian-looking people. That's me. We have a white who comes and trains us, Rafiq. We have homosexual people, ask Anwar Ibrahim. And we also have extreme Muslims, ask Alan Wakba. But it's not the debate, right? This debate is about who necessarily facilitates a more integrated society. So, under their side, they told us three things. Number one, how social cohesion happens. Number two, how better teachers will come about. And thirdly, from Mukhlis's POI, we can guess that they're talking about cultural specification in the job market here. But first, let's deal with this first idea about social cohesion. So Berat told you, people are going to be able to celebrate differences. Therefore, you're going to accept one another. This is problematic because it's assumptions. It assumes that people would actually want to openly declare themselves part of a religion. In a community that's Islamophobic, Muslim people don't want to be Islam. They don't want to go out and call themselves Muslims because they might probably be discriminated. Jewish people in the Muslim community don't want to call themselves Jews because they might get heated, they might get bullied. Which means that all of their benefits are contingent on the wants and needs of an individual to express his religion freely. This is also extremely problematic because it's a concession to say that in a lot of circumstances where individuals are deep-rootedly influenced by their culture, these are individuals who are not willing to let go of their culture because they think that that's far more dominant and that shows that their culture is far stronger. We think these are individuals who grew up from a background to say that I must defend my religious rhetorics in any given circumstance. That means I cannot be friends with a homosexual guy, even though he's cool and he's really nice, I can't do it because my religion prohibits me. We'd say that because of these rhetorics, it's extremely harder to break this specific narrative within schools. So even if all these discussions happen, even if you're going to work as a team with other people, we think that you won't appreciate that person for his identity, but because he means something to you. Which means that you don't appreciate him because he's a homosexual, you don't accept all homosexuals, but you only accept him because he is your friend. We'd say that this dilutes the ability for an individual to appreciate differences. That's the comparative nuance that we have under our side. We say the moment you hold on to identities and segregate yourself, you're better able to appreciate differences holistically and not at an individual level. Therefore, our side holds the most sustainable change because in the future, when you come across a different gay individual or a different person from a different Muslim sect, you're more likely to engage and understand that he's someone that you treat as an equal, not because he means something to you, but because he's a human being. We say within those circumstances, our change is significantly better. Sit down. But thirdly, gentlemen, we also talk about this. We talk to us how you get better teachers, right? This is not a problem of rich people not necessarily going to those schools. But irrespective, you don't make it any more attractive to these individuals. Because if these are rich individuals that also hold on to cultural perspectives, these are individuals who are still insecure about sending their children to these schools. Which means that the money doesn't necessarily go there. They go into sending their children to other more extreme madrasas in the Arab world. We see within those circumstances their interest is not necessarily assured. But what's even worse now is that you force these individuals to then become a separation in schools. Because it's counterproductive to put an extreme rich individual in a school with an extreme poor individual. We say that number one strengthens the inferiority that a poor individual has. But secondly, it promotes a greater rhetoric for these individuals to naturally get traction within schools. Which means everyone wants to befriend the rich kid because he has money and because his parents are influential within PTA meetings. We say that this form of discrimination is one that's significantly more harmful because compared to a real world school where rich kids and poor kids are more often than not separated between private schools and normal schools, it is far more likely that in the normal schools people are able to generally not identify one another according to class. We'd say that that's far better for integration because that means if a regular Indian kid goes to school with a regular Chinese kid, they're most likely going to be friends. Even rich Indian kid goes to school with a poor Chinese kid or poor Chinese kids, we'd say that discrimination happens more selectively. Especially because these are individuals who are carrying carrying their culture into those particular schools. Yes, sir.
Let's assume gay people will always be hated by Muslims. Let's assume a rich person will never socialize or respect a poor person. When are they more likely to at least consider this individual has the right to life? Is it when you never see this individual at all in your life, or when you're forced to do things like a group assignment with them and play football with them because your school system does it?
Right. So here's where I go to this one, right? We say that it's far more important for these extreme individuals to have that change come to them at a moderate pace. This world tells you that you must go to school, immediately see like this Jew guy playing football, and like, oh yeah, why not I join in? It doesn't work that way. These are individuals who are not only insecure about other people, but are less likely to accept it because it's a direct threat. What's the alternative under our side? We say that individual discussions from people of their own particular race or background are ones that are better. For example, in a madrasah, and like a liberal Muslim who goes to that madrasah is able to make internal change because all the other Muslims are willing to buy into his particular rhetoric because he comes from the same background. But what's the change they provide? They say, oh, this Muslim guy go like hang out with the homosexual kids and come back and say, oh, they're human, they're actually really nice. It doesn't work that way. People will otherize that particular liberal Muslim who's trying to putting in effort to make that change. Why is it? We say because these are individuals who feel, oh no, he's too liberal for our kind, and his ideas are ones that are already influenced by liberalism. We say that because of this, they are more likely to lash out onto these ideologies and are more inclined to push away from change. Outside the house, works with internal change, where they're not able to see how much of a threat liberal cultures are, but more willing to accept that those are things that are also generally reasonable. The outside the house makes it not a threat, therefore counterproductive. No, thank you. Here's the argument: how you further indoctrinate these individuals from home. We see a lot of conservative parents who send their kids to these schools are far more threatened by the cultures that their children will generally experience in school, right? Which means that they're more likely to indoctrinate their children a lot more to a point where these individuals are not going to make that form of change. We say because of this insecurity, children are more able to hold on to their particular culture and not necessarily give in to any form of liberalism because parents generally take an active stance against it. Here's the comparative. In schools where your children necessarily goes to a madrasah, you don't feel the need to overwhelmingly indoctrinate him because you still feel that he's enclosed in an environment where those ideas are still generally popular. We see because these ideas are no longer popular, parents want to make it popular and parents will force it into the lives of their children. What this means is when they leave school, it is harder for them to integrate. Even in these schools, they will not integrate and abuse individuals who cross their ideologies. We say this is far more harmful for any form of assimilation because it means that not only does everyone hate you, but you hate everyone else. This is a change that we're not willing to forego because these are individuals who generally deserve a better life. We don't think that parents should be responsible for this change. We don't think that parents should be responsible for any form of racial, gender, or sexual classification. We're extremely proud to fight for one Malaysia.
The dialogue to start the second half of the debate, I invite the member of government. Here.
Two individuals reconcile with each other over barriers of hate, ego, and racial discrimination once they realize how similar they both are. We think that a structure that empowers segregation destroys the exact rhetoric that societies require in order to be unified. Meaning to say, Madam Chair, that opening opposition on their side have defended a case in which you allow such individuals into a structural change, a structural way for individuals to then segregate themselves. We think that opening government approach the debate into telling us why social cohesion is very important. We will approach the debate on the side of closing government and tell you how segregation and a structure like this exactly is the one that empowers individuals to make that active choice to become bigots and economically empower their own race at the end of the day. One large question to answer before I move on with my speech. Firstly, is an already multicultural environment sufficient enough for us to recognize in this debate, which is probably the extension that will come from closing opposition, right? We also have to acknowledge one thing, no thank you sir, that the best case scenario that they have under opposition is to tell us that a multicultural society already exists within status quo and doesn't even have to exist within a school in itself. Not necessarily acknowledging the fact that not every country in this world is also like that. For example, within Ireland, Madam Chair, you have a huge religious gap that Catholic people have with the Christians. You are, in the best case scenario, only talking about Malaysia, where there is already a multicultural society. No thank you. But without acknowledging the fact that racial problems are still systemic within Malaysia, and that problem also is very persistent within your side of the house. 4 responses towards this. Firstly, you still allow segregation to happen under their side of the house because people no longer reconcile with themselves when you don't see another person viscerally in front of you to also interact with these people. But secondly, even if they argue that outside of your school you can meet a person in the football field and play football with them, that's fine because you don't really have to meet in school. It's problematic because you have to tell us why the interaction will necessarily happen. We tell you that it will not. Why exactly? Because there are other external factors that may be able to control your life and your interaction with other people. I might have a racist parent who, at least when I go back home, can tell me to avoid that Indian boy and not play football with him. For example, I might have a racist, like, to the very least, be living in a predominantly Chinese neighborhood that does not allow or doesn't even have any Malay people living within the area for me to even interact with at the end of the day. But the very fact they also, as a child, spend so much time, and this is the nuance of education, is when you're a child and you spend so much time with your parents, they're able to control and dictate at which point you also then interact with people. You have to tell me why a Malay boy is going to likely play football with a Chinese person if all those factors then still exist. No thank you. But thirdly, you have to show assimilation under their side of paradigm, meaning to say that how familiarity will still be something which is sufficient when the cause of you being a bigot can still happen. But fourthly and lastly, Madam Chair, at this point we ask you this question. At what point will these individuals then interact with other people? If you want to tell us that once you're old and you're no longer in high school, then you can interact with people, the likeliness of that interaction happening is the product in which you see people who have so much prejudice because you didn't grow up as a child with other people within your society and understanding who exactly they are. We think that that prejudice is not likely going to change because you're old and you will not change what your perception is towards those other people. Before I move on to extension opening.
So some parents are okay with their Muslim child being friends with homosexuals. Unfortunately, this guy can't be friends with homosexuals in school because he would be discriminated. Isn't that counterproductive to your cause?
If it's at least no, it's not counterproductive because making friends with a homosexual is actually a good thing, regardless of what other people can tell you. That's discrimination under your side, and that will only exist because you assume that mentality. First thing to talk about, how segregated schools empower and an imbalance between races, religion, and gender. Here's where I talk about a more economic side of the debate because it's Kopitiam Ekonomi. No thank you. We have to analyze this we have to operate in a reality manner in whichever aspect on your side, because of segregation, you will have an imbalance. Gender, well, there's an all-wise association with a lot of schools out there. For example, MCKK and Makuba. I hope you guys find MCKK that well. It doesn't really seem to be that well. But also, Madam Chair, we argue that when it comes to all-wise association, men tend to be in positions of power. That's why you will always have men and male schools being better than female schools. No, thank you. But let's talk about race then. Economically, you can also sense that there's a lot of strong presence of PIBG within Chinese schools within Malaysia in itself. Or for example, white individuals who funnel a lot of money back into white schools and because they're historically richer. Thirdly, we argue too that Catholic schools in Ireland are completely richer than Christian schools. There is a power imbalance in that certain scenario. No, thank you. No, thank you, right? That means 4 things. Firstly, there's a subtle base discrimination that exists, right? When you have a stronger PIBG within your vernacular school, that means that the government can have plausible deniability to say, I don't really want to fund your school because you guys have enough money. But what can also happen is that if I have a racist parent who also only wants my child to only be in that school and not interact with other people, I can make that choice to become an active bigot. But secondly, Madam Chair, there's no benefit whatsoever, no thank you, in how you tell us that a race will prosper because affirmative action doesn't really work if it's the opposite. If a Chinese school, a Chinese vernacular school becomes more empowered under your side of the house, that's problematic because they are not the ones who need the help, for example. But thirdly, you increase the power imbalance of infrastructure that translate to a wider economical gap. But why exactly? Because Chinese vernacular schools, for example, will always have students who are smarter due to the amount of infrastructure that you have because of all the Chinese parents who are also rich. For example, they can empower that. You have younger and smarter children who empower your race at the end of the day. The problem with that is that when you make them compete with other people within society, there is an imbalance that only that one race will be smarter than the rest. But fourthly, you feed this idea into this rhetoric that you have to help your own demographic. Why is that bad? Because it just makes sense, right? You feed the battle that there is a public and there's a racial segregation that you have to fight within each other. There's a Malay and like a Chinese fight within Malaysia, for example. What then is bad when you segregate them from young? Firstly, because there's no interaction whatsoever due to the choice that my parents make. From when I'm a parent and I make sure that my child no longer interacts with people, is an active choice that these parents make. We wish them to be in a more homogeneous school. But secondly, the active choice and the consideration that you open between parents in order to choose that I want to send my child to this school and not allow them to interact with other people means that you're actively making that choice to be a bigot and to ensure that they are not exposed to the rest of society. If you want unity to be something that can happen, we think structurally by removing this policy, Madam Chair, we ensure that people can then interact with each other with no ability for you to empower schools that allow other races to be better than the other. For the sake of a not empowered one demographic that's more empowered than the other, we fight under CG.
Member of government, I invite the member of opposition. You are here.
Under their paradigm, if I am a girl that wears a hijab and studies within a national school in a society that's Islamophobic, I don't only have to focus on finishing my assignments, I also have to spend time justifying to them that I am a normal human being. We don't think it's fair for you to impose this role upon children who need their education, especially if they come from a minority group that requires economy enfranchisement that is only made possible via an education environment that's conducive to them. We love supervision and integration, but we think it's a system that needs to be opted into, not forced upon every single individual. Because let's be clear here, in this debate, there are still minority races that still go to national schools that can participate in all of your discourse. The type of minorities that build vernacular schools are the very ones that we know aren't able to integrate, even if you put them next door towards other individuals who care more about cultural protection, who care more about their dignity, and not be diluted by nationalism. Which is the other myth I want to dispel in this debate. Nationalism is not an equal buffet for everyone within that country. Nationalism is often dictated by a majority race, regardless of what mandatory quota you want to impose in your policy. That's why we feel it is not fair to push this competition upon racial minorities within national schools to compete in terms of funding, in terms of influences in national schools in order to get what they want. They should be able to isolate themselves in a community in which at least they are comfortable with. But let's be clear here. A lot of their characterizations is based upon the fact that the moment if I am a Chinese and I choose to live within a community that's majority Chinese, automatically that makes me a second-class citizen and a bigot. I don't think segregation of itself, which people choose where they're comfortable with, is something that's a bad choice at the end of the day, especially when you're doing so, imposing and antagonizing their cultural protection. In my speech, I'll talk about three major things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why it's unfair to use children as social tools for change. Secondly, I'm also going to talk about the competition, why national schools aren't equal, and why the existence of vernacular schools actually lead to better integration. A lot of my rebuttals will be integrated into all of these questions, but first, a few things I need to clarify in this debate. Firstly, we don't think our vernacular schools are ashrams on mountains or sekolah pondoks. We can still mandate things like the teaching of national languages and civic education because we think that's important. We will still make it compulsory for religious schools to teach maths and science. All these things still exist. But it's about creating an environment in which these people feel comfortable with, in which their language is not compromised because I have to speak English in order to make other people understand me. It's okay for me to speak Mandarin in order to actualize who I am. The comparativeness with this debate, it cannot exist within a community where segregation in Malaysia means there's a wall apparently between Klang and Shah Alam, so Indians never meet Malays at the end of the day. Right? Let's go on to the first question. Why exactly is it unfair to use children as social tools in order to create change? Firstly, I'm going to dispel this myth that the moment you put people next to each other, automatically they become friends. Or usually, most of them are not. Children already are indoctrinated with certain forms of identity that they cannot opt out of at the end of the day. In which what happens is that when they do go to these schools, they don't see that, look, we are the same. They see, oh, we are actually different people, which legitimizes the very form of isolation in which they choose to enter into, as opposed to dispelling that particular myth. But secondly, who cares even if I am able to socially cohesive? My reason here is to be able to be educated and get a high school diploma, not to be able to justify to every single person that I am a minority and thus I am equal to you, because it's an unfair burden to impose upon you, especially if you're a child who can't really justify the many economic expenses or the many social costs which people have to face when they talk to many different types of individuals. Thirdly, it also encourages things like bullying. They'll say things like, oh, but there are anti-bullying laws that we can always enforce. First of all, a lot of bullying that happens even within national schools are very subtle and silent. For example, things like isolations and things like cliques. That's why even in a national school like Damansara Jaya, a lot of people still only relate to their own particular races, that eventually even people who are Malays and exist within our own clique are considered as second-class individuals because they do not speak English and because they do not talk to people who are Chinese individuals. Within that form of isolation and segregation, it's a form of bullying that we impose upon people who aren't able to cope with the many different standards of society, right? So lastly, it's also about the fact, the reason why we have to care about the economy enfranchisement is because education is what's necessary in order to bring these minority races up their economic ladder. If these individuals aren't able to feel comfortable in what they're educated in, that means they'll still be able to disenfranchise, to be disenfranchised within even national schools. That's why in the national schools where there are majority Chinese people, a lot of Malays still fall behind because they aren't able to compete with these people because they have so many other burdens in order to prove that, look, I am able to compete with these individuals at the end of the day. We don't think it's fair to impose this upon children, especially who aren't able to justify the costs and benefits. Secondly, let's talk about basically national schools aren't equal. Firstly, they said that, look, now what you have is that there's an equal discourse between the PTAs and associations. That's why it's good. Firstly, we don't think it's fair for you to encourage individuals to compete with majority donors for a Malay race in the PTA, because what happens is that this would dilute other forms of cultural environments which is people can feel comfortable with, right? So even if you say, look, there'll be more money because you have to fund the national schools, this will trigger out the facilities. These are only facilities, not things like cultural celebrations in which people feel as if I want to be able to celebrate Deepavali without having to compete in terms of venues or dates with other celebrations at the end of the day. All things are very important for you to protect the integrity of necessarily individuals. That's why private schools are good, because then it's finally can go to an exclusive protection. Before I move on, yes, closing.
Minorities will likely gain numbers if all of them go to homogeneous schools instead of some go to public schools and then some don't. The probability of being a minority is likelier under your side.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
No, the thing is, even if you have more minorities, these minorities will still have to compete with the majority and have to make compromises in order to get what they want. And we don't want to force these people to make those compromises because we don't think it's necessary. That's why, for example, even though we advocate for One Malaysia and nationalism within Malaysia, we think it's still sad that Deepavali is one of the least celebrations in Malaysia because we always have to compete with the limelight of other medias in terms of Hari Raya, in terms of Christmas. All these things will exist on the spectrum trickle down towards national schools, and that's why we think that it's bad. But the reason why we feel like it's bad as well is because we improve the radicalization of parents. Why? Because parents still feel as if they're antagonized by the state. That's why this balance is necessary. Because although we want cohesion, we don't want to antagonize them. Why is it bad for parents to teach them? Firstly, it's because it's not exposed towards the environment in public, right? You can't put CCTVs in every home. That means it's much harder to regulate the thought of things in which they teach. At least if they have madrasas, you can regulate in terms of whether or not you're allowed to teach this radical environments, whether or not you're allowed to teach this radical tenets and all these things. And all of these can be diluted, which improves the self-cohesion in which you want at the end of the day. In this debate, the reason why CO wins is because we showed you a much more balanced world in which we can create cohesion without antagonizing people who need this protection the most. Nationalism is not an equal buffet. That's why I'm proud to oppose.
Thank you, member of opposition. I invite the government witness. Here.
Good. Salmanella.
Mr. Speaker, it feels like we are forgetting what was it like to be a child. You remember the old days when it was fun to play in the playground without realizing, without caring whoever you're interacting with. Whether a white kid or black kid, we just play for fun together. And this is what we keep forgetting, that children don't really know, don't really identify these concepts of whether you should be afraid of these people or you should be not, but these are imposed actively by their parents. And throughout this debate, I have a few, the questions that I identified today is one, which is better to solve this problem identity, two, which is better at breaking rhetorics, and three, which is better for the economic prosperity of a country in the long run. First, a few responses. Now, under their side, they still allow minorities to enter public school. Okay. We tell you that the probability of if they allow this vernacular school or schools that allow these minorities to happen, the probability of this hijab to go into that school, in going to a public school, is less likely, as now there are options for them to enter this school that cater for their own needs. Now, even though if they enter, no thank you, even so if they enter this public school, the number of their minority will increase, and the people will not be attacking that place. Now, no thank you, because on the other side, under their paradigm, you still allow a Malay parent, to send a child into a Chinese vernacular school. So which is more likely to happen, and this kind of discrimination will not happen. This kind of attacking will not happen in this kind of situation, but it's more a bit neutral rather than a contrast of Islamophobia. Now, no, thank you. Now, in our paradigm, we empower interaction between children. Between these children when they are small. When there are less barriers, when there are less mental barriers, when there are less conscious evaluation of people, when you're a kid, you'll be able to interact with these people. Kids will be able to interact with other kids a bit more easier. Now, no, thank you. Now, before that, no, thank you. Okay, and since it is easier to happen in our paradigm, this interaction, then under their paradigm, the interaction only happens when you're older, when you're now graduating from their school, which is always in the case it's too late, because the perceptions are now hard to change. Perceptions are now well built, that you have a mental filter that says that these people are like this and these people are like that. Now there is an unfortunate characterization that they don't really solve under their idea of only vernacular schools, under the gender-based school, and under the idea of only having schools that fit certain minorities. Now, let's evaluate which paradigm solve the identity problem even better. Now, under our paradigm, as kids are able to please sit down. As kids are able to identify which values they feel better with, instead of being judged actively by their parents who put these kids inside the school, and they are able to judge this better and right and wrong, especially in school where there are opt-in and opt-out clauses of what you're going to take. Then the child will be able to identify and relate better with other people, instead of just relating with your own culture. Not only that, in public schools, we have a lot of interaction time. As I said before, children, when they want to play football, they play football together. They don't really have this mental idea of sex. They don't really have the idea of, wait, they choose, we're not going to play with them. But this idea is propagated under their side because of these schools that that cater only for certain race or certain minorities.
For that, sir.
No, thank you. Now, and even if they say that they protect the minorities better, but since the children are now interacting early on, they encounter this problem early on, and they will be able to reconcile these differences early on instead of waiting for them to wait for after university, after how the opening government state. After they're entering APU, then when they realize there are different types of people. And as you can see, these are only happen to people who are liberated, who have the awareness to do so. But if you calculate this, if you promote these ideas since you're a small child, you'll be able to easier to see, you'll be easier to interact. You'll be as you are now exposed from early on. Okay, closing.
So, if these parents choose to send their kids to national schools because they think the kids in Canada, we are okay with that. But why do we impose this choice upon individuals as if they all have the same capacity to adapt?
Because we are forgetting that these are children, they have the ability to learn. Therefore, they can easily adapt compared to us adults because we have preconceived notions of what the world is supposed to look as compared to girl, as compared to child. And this is exactly what happens when parents impose their ideas, impose their beliefs to segregate people okay, you're an Indian kid, you go to Indian school, you're a Chinese kid, you go to Chinese school. But under our paradigm, we're saying that you're a kid, you go to a homogeneous school where you learn about how is it to live together, and interact with others instead of just going. So instead of just saying no, thank you. Instead of just saying cultural minority. Not only that, even if we're going to argue that they don't lose their identity in a way because the interaction is 36. Because and the interaction between their own cultures also occur after school. Because they will then return to their housing and they will still be able to identify their parents. But under their paradigm, they are always secluded, they are always excluded from interacting with other people. Now, furthermore, when you continue down this train of analysis, you will notice that if you propagate the idea of only one race of only minority schools should exist, this time from segregation is now kids are able to segregate themselves from other kids. In that other kids will then propagate another level of economic disparity because as my closing stated that as now Chinese kids we only go to Chinese school and Chinese school then fit into the loop of how they keep improving their own school. But in under our paradigm, every school will have a equal distribution of money, equal distribution of wealth. So to promote the idea of unity and also so that everyone can really understand how is it to live better in our paradigm. And therefore, we are so proud to propose this policy.
I invite the opposition.
Madam Chair, I am an Indian boy. I attended a public school. I attended a public school where the majority of them were Malays. The majority of them ended up calling me Keling at the end of the day just because of my skin color. Whatever premise that they're trying to argue upon, that there's going to be no form of racism that's going to exist on their side is false. Because they will never understand how it's like for you to be a minority, not only in your own premise, but also being a minority among other majorities in a school. It is not only harmful, whatever I've said, but imposing this harm onto a child is even more significantly harmful, and we feel that site CG dealt with that even more. I'm going to prove to you a few things in my rebuttal speech.
how under our side we also create a form of multicultural environment and how we also create nationalism, but without the expense of students getting bullied, without the expense of minorities in those schools getting called things like what I was called when I went to those schools. Have a seat. Next, I'm also going to explain to you something that Zim says significantly onto why these individuals do not deserve to get bullied, because there is no longer a choice under their side. I will also prove to you onto how radicalization is even worse under their side, even though the nuances significantly came from side closing opposition. Firstly, have a seat. Firstly, the whole argument on multicultural environment and how which side actually enforces nationalism. But the question, Madam Chair, is at what expense do you really want to trade off nationalism for the safety and for the security of these individuals, minorities who are going to these certain schools? Madam Chair, have a seat. I'm not done yet. Next, I'm also going to go to the extent of explaining to you why must we have a choice of protectionism towards these individuals. Because all was trying to imply that basically, if you were Chinese living in a Chinese community, you will be treated as a second-class citizen, and second-class person in society, and also a bigot. We prove to you why it's not fair for you to push this unfair burden onto the minorities going to those schools, and we also explain to you onto the racial minorities and how it's a fantasy coming from their side. It's only 2 minutes. Calm down. Next, their side was based on a whole fantasy that if you don't get two individuals sitting from different sitting together, they will never, the one Malaysian dream will never be achieved. We say that is false, because when you realize how different, and if you realize how different someone else is from you, we say that is when you go to the extent or even questioning why are they so different from the majority race. Even if Zim failed to explain to it, we say it's because he's a majority, but coming from a minority race, and I did it exceptionally well. Sit down. Students realize that they are different people. Why is it an unfair burden to actually push the whole idea of isolation, even if it's going to occur in public school? Because even if it occurs in public schools, we say there are cliques that are formed between these certain people in society. You will always have that Macha Indian gang, and you also have that Malay gang, as well as the Chinese gangs that are existing in this public school. I mean, look at Damansai Jaya Debate Union. They are Chinese. Look at SP Debate Union. They are Indians. So we think through these certain things, there also is some form of segregation that occurs under their side, and it's not only mutually exclusive to what is going to happen under status quo. Sit down. Now, why is this choice so important? A choice that they fail to engage with coming from Zim. Because under our side, the whole premise is that the whole argument is that how our choice that we create allow individuals to solve their fantasies, while parents also give these children a choice to protect themselves. Because if a parent feels that their son is going to get bullied because he's a minority, we say we give those parents the choice to give their children protection, because we feel as long as the choice exists in status quo, because as long as the choice exists, their whole fantasy will also still be solved if you have parents who think it's best to send them to public school. But what about the parents who believe that their son is going to get bullied? Something that they fail to argue upon, something that they fail to say, how the safety of these individuals is going to be guaranteed no matter what. I'll take you in a while. Sit down. Okay. Because even if whatever they're going to say is true, we say even if under our side in the religious schools, you'll also have those liberals and those conservatives. So whatever discourse that they're trying to create is existent under our side as well. I'll take opening.
The Islamic girl that gets bullied in school under your model remains to be the girl on the street who I think is a terrorist. Under our model, teachers try to help her in school. Tell us how, under your model in any way, this girl ever learns to deal with Islamophobia, or people ever change their mindset about Muslims.
Okay, the whole argument about changing the mindset of Muslims is something that's not only mutually exclusive to their side, but also we feel we also combat it because through this form of actually protection, through this form of actually protecting these individuals, we create a safe platform. We create a safe platform for them. But even if you want to engage what they're trying to say, we say these individuals will have friends outside their school. They'll be involved in extracurricular activities where they'll also be able to have some form of discourse. The form of discourse, they'll counter whatever petty harms that are coming from your side. Next, the whole problem on the money theory issue. O was trying to say, and as well as CG and OG were trying to imply that even if you're living in a Chinese society, why is it still wrong? Because we say, even if it trickles down, it will only be towards facilities. The money that they are trying to create will not be engaged towards helping the minorities living in society. Probably the only best thing that's going to happen under their side is that you will have aircon in your class, or you will have AstroTurf playing field. We say, at what expense are you actually trading this thing off? You're trading it off at the cultural protection of these individuals. They are trying to be convenient by saying that having an aircon is better than protecting your rights. We say that is wrong. Why is it wrong now? Because we say you dilute the culture and the celebration because society now has conformed to the small things like having a venue or hall and what they are trying to imply under their side. Now, let me just tell you why CG actually won today's debate. We won today's debate because we were the more comparative side. We were the side that engaged in all aspects of the argument, and we also gave you the scenarios towards both premise. We say our premise is the best premise because our premise is the more realistic premise, not one who's based on a society where everyone is getting bullied, and also not one who's only based on a society which no one is getting bullied at all. Coming from a minority, I think I'd rather get protected than have a hall with aircon.